Pardon me for breaking the silence again. Everyone can hear me okay? This is the last Dharma talk, and we'll begin today with BruceE speaking, this being the last day, about being without self in the world, in a sense, the issue of returning to the world, so to speak. After that, I will try to bring things together for the final Dharma talk. Bruce, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. When a retreat ends, it's over. We are told not to cling to whatever state we are in when the retreat ends, or try to recreate it. After a week of focus on no self, then we go back to some kind of self, maybe a somewhat different self. Self and no self are not really opposites. They are part of the same whole. As Jeff said in one of his talks, quote, "By its very nature, self cannot come fully to rest or be completely satisfied. This is the basis of Buddhism. Confirm it clearly to yourself. Otherwise, as you already know from your own experience, you simply continue in the same confused, painful circle. Thus, we gladly entrust ourselves to retreat like this as a precious entrance into true rest and peace. And then see what needs to be done. To truly be without self, we must turn around without missing a beat and be somebody when something needs to be done. Opening up to this through our own experience allows us to see our own delusions for what they are and really let them go." Unquote. There is a transition process in coming out of a retreat. Jeff often reminds participants not to make any big decisions for a week or two. Why? Does the post-retreat self need some time to reconstruct itself? We have all experienced post-retreat euphoria and heightened sense awareness. One friend has remarked that the best part of a retreat is the 2-hour drive home. We should also recall that Zen literature is full of examples of students having deep realization experiences off the cushion during their normal lives. So we should perhaps be especially vigilant after a retreat. A friend was helping a few others clean up in a kitchen right after a retreat. Someone dropped a pot. Bang! One person stopped everything, waited for a few seconds, then said, "Drop it again." But it was too late. So there is a transition process at work, even if everything has come to rest. The self emerges from it. But what exactly does that last sentence of Jeff's talk mean? How do we let our delusions go by being somebody? How is being somebody part of practice? Of course, all of us who practice have to experience some kind of self, no self transition, or we could not function in the world. But is this transition done without conscious thought? Or does it need some purposeful self-awareness? Does our self come out of no self or out of habit? Like many of you, I have done quite a few retreats as I have come back into daily life and tried to carry on a constant practice. One tool that sometimes helps is the concept of transparency versus filter. In our sitting, and often also in our non-sitting lives, we try to be as transparent as possible, letting sensory inputs, thoughts, and emotions pass through without clinging to them. But in everyday life, we must put together a self, become somebody to meet different situations. We hopefully become more aware of the various filters that make up ourselves. Those filters include things like gender, age, physical infirmities or gifts, and mental, intellectual, emotional filters that we use to live in the world. These are not necessarily good or bad, and in some form they are necessary. But we should practice to utilize them in useful ways rather than be controlled by them. Practice can help here by providing the perception and insight to first notice the filters are there and what they mean. And second, set aside those that are harmful or do not meet the need when, as Jeff said, something needs to be done. Of course, Zen practitioners are all still have different personalities that they present to others. But hopefully they are more self-aware and can, in some sense, apply different personalities to different situations and take appropriate action. But this is hard and takes constant attention. Who is doing this? What filters are still up? Can we be more open, more transparent, more useful in the world? I will end with a short verse attributed to Hakuin that I think describes the self, no self struggle, but perhaps I'm wrong. It says, the beast outside shoves at the door. The beast inside holds it back, pouring sweat from head to foot, battling for their very lives, fighting on through the night until the dawn appears and laughter fills the early light. They were friends from the start. Thank you. I make a bow.
Thank you, Bruce. Does anyone have a question or concern today, not just from out of the practice, but also concerning going back to the world? Please feel free to speak up for the benefit of all. I was actually going to ask you if no one else had anything to say. I think you can speak from deep experience here. Tim?
Yes, Bruce already summed it up beautifully. I don't have really a lot to add, except that I've been thinking about an experience I had some years ago during a retreat. where I noticed that when the bell rings at the end of a period, I can continue practicing. Before that time, I was struggling with pain and maintaining focus and practice, and when the bell would ring, I would let everything drop, and then I would come back again at the next ring of the bell. So my practice during a retreat was very stoppy and go-y, and I noticed that it was possible when the bell rang to simply continue practicing, and that became a practice of seamlessness, a seamless practice during the retreat. So just recently, I started asking myself the question, if I can do that within a retreat, if I look at it on another level in my life, I have the same stoppy and go-iness from retreat to daily life, to retreat to daily life. And I started asking the question, can I find that same seamlessness from retreat to daily life? So at this point, it's more of a question than an answer. But I would really appreciate anybody else's input on the idea of seamlessness between retreat and daily life. Can we be more intentional about practicing to carry our practice through into daily life? And finally, I've started to think, because of this technology we're using, is there a way to design a retreat that would help us to practice that very thing? Retreat within daily life and practicing to be seamless as we pass from intense practice to daily life to intense practice. That's something that I would be very interested to explore with everybody.
Thank you, Tim. Louis?
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Tim. Just the following on what Tim just said, how to pursue the practice while in retreat and off retreat in our daily life. I think that these online retreats are a very nice format to do that, because these retreats, sorry, are not held within a retreat center. They're held in our daily life. We practice, we come out of practice, we prepare meals, we do the dishes, we do all kinds of things in our daily setting. So it's not that we come out of practice, like you just said, but it's a beautiful way to make it seamless. Why stop? Is there any reason to stop? So you just go on, you do the dishes, and then you go on the mat. And it's wonderful to bring the practice in that way in our daily life, because most of the time it isn't part of our daily life in such an intense way. So I feel that these online retreats have something very precious embedded in them, because they allow us to really bring the practice home instead of going through it apart somewhere else outside of our daily life. So that's one thing. And following on what Bruce said, if I can remember well, there's a, how to go from retreat practice to daily life practice. Well, as for myself, what I see is it lies in the openness, doing what needs to be done in daily life, but doing it in a kind of open way. You don't have to endorse a kind of person that would be a self, a kind of fixed self. No one has to do that. You just go along in the situations with your abilities, with your knowledge, your know-how. You just go through it with all of that. And I find that it's really helpful when you're caught off guard in daily life. When you meet people, you deal with people, but not knowing in a way how to do it. It just happens. And at times you'll feel like a clown because you're not acting from a kind of fixed scenario. You're just letting things happen. So remaining in that kind of openness, that is the best way I've found up till now to just go on with the practice, just go on with the practice, just go on with the practice. Not trying to fix anything, just remaining in a kind of soft openness towards all that happens. So, hope that this may help. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Tina?
I would just like to add my thanks to what's been said, Bruce and Tim and Louis, of course, and just for me, practice is and has become seamless. Sometimes, like Louis, it's like feels like clownish. You come into situations you don't know what to do, and you bring whatever gifts or faults or challenges you have to those situations. I do want to add, on most mornings, if I can, we talk about Sergio Zendo, but other people are the Jicky of that, Mike and Anne, and sometimes I think Juliana. So we have this online kind of community, which feels like part of, the intense practice, even though we are not, with these people in the, physically. So in the morning I get up, if I can, if I'm not working, I'll sit and we all say thank you to the Jicky and thank you to everybody and wave to everybody. It feels very affirming, that we are practicing together. And then on Saturday, I go to the physical practice where I'm with people physically, and that's a different experience. But I think keeping the practice somehow or another ongoing is how I think it's helpful. I try to do one-on-one when Jeff is available. I do text study when I have the time to do that. And so it's always this letting go, this openness, seeing through things, seeing our faults, seeing our challenges, seeing our gifts, and eventually having some sense that there is the barriers crumble, that we are in effect somehow or another unified. It's not always clear what that means, but when there's a challenge, it means something going on. What's the barrier? Let it go, open up, that kind of thing. So, I'm with Tim about online retreats. I also miss physical retreats. So if we can somehow or another keep ourselves going as a Sangha, as a practice, that would be lovely. So anyway, thank you for everybody. Thanks so much.
You can hear me okay? I'd like to return to some of the concerns that we have taken up in the first two Dharma talks, as well as today, and then leave time if you have any other questions or concerns for the other Dharma speakers, not just today, but the other days as well, or anything else from out of the practice or concerning returning to our daily lives. Again, just to briefly review, I tried to open up some of the concerns of our practice through the life of Gautama Buddha, his youth, what he went through, his extreme indulgences, you might say, and then his extreme asceticism, giving up everything, and what went on there. His spontaneously recalling seated under the rose apple tree in this profound contentment, his awakening under the Bodhi tree, and then his great hesitation, as it is called as well. What about his death? What about the end of his life? How did he do that? Hakuin was mentioned today, the Japanese Zen master who died a little over 250 years ago. Bruce quoted him at the end. When he was at his prime in his 50s, maybe early 60s, when you read his talks and so on, sometimes he's speaking with such energy, and he'll say things like, I can go for days and nights on end without even thinking about lying down. Absolutely never do I need to lie down and rest. I can just go from one activity to another seamlessly. And I trust we all have at least touched that kind of experience, all good and well. But it's interesting to contrast that with Gautama Buddha speaking about his own life at the end. There's no superpowers. He's very human. He has come clearly to the end of self, but that doesn't turn him into some kind of a super self. Rather, he's just who he is. I've gathered a couple of brief quotes from the end of Gautama Buddha's life. I'd like to share them with you. Again, this is from the Pali text, the early Buddhist suttas, including what's called the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. There's a Sanskrit version of this, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, but this is the earlier one. He says things like this at the end of his life. I am tired. I am weary. I am thirsty. Then Ananda, his attendant, brings him something to drink. He also says, I am now like an old cart that can only be kept going with repairs. He also said, when young, one is subject to aging. When healthy, subject to illness. When alive, subject to death. The complexion, the skin color, the complexion is no longer so clear and bright. The limbs, arms and legs, are flabby and wrinkled. The back bent forward. There's a discernible, a noticeable change in eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. He continues, now I am frail, delicate, old, aged, far gone in years. This is my 80th year, and my life is spent, done. Even, again, the same image, even as an old cart is held together with much difficulty, so my body is kept going only with supports. Only when in formless concentration is this body comfortable. He then says the very famous, therefore be islands or refuges unto yourselves. Seek no external refuge. With the Dhamma, the Pali, the Sanskrit for Dharma, the truth. Dhamma as your island or refuge. Seek no other refuge. It's important to see what Hockman was, I suppose, honestly speaking about when he was in his prime, going days and days without needing to even take a rest. But I urge you to take and savor these words of Gautama Buddha at the end of his life as well. There's a power there that is even greater, I would suggest. I've been asked to speak a little bit more about this contentment that I have been addressing through doubt and through contentment as well. I trust you are coming to see from your own experience that this contentment is not just a temporary happiness or a joy or even a bliss. David C. in his brief Dharma talk the other day expressed it. There's a wavering that remains in this happiness, joy, or bliss, as opposed to true contentment. We could say seeking contentment is itself a symptom of our dis-ease, our wavering, isn't it? It's the same with great doubt. Great doubt is a very helpful way through, but it is not an end in itself. That doubt must be naturally dissolved or resolved. Then, how to say, we freely find ourselves coming from boundless, seamless contentment, not going toward it, trying to get to it. We are coming from it, no matter how busy we get. Bruce today spoke of doing or being what needs to be done. Yes, with loving wisdom. And when nothing needs to be done, we enjoy that. A simple Zen expression sums it up. With each step, the pure wind rises. Even if you're in a wheelchair, even if you're on your deathbed and you can't even take a step, the pure wind rises. To put it in today's context, for those of you Australian, whatnot, in the Southern Hemisphere, leaves crunch, the sound of leaves, leaves crunch, delight in what is underfoot. What is the subject here? Who or what is that? For those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, especially in Quebec area, let's make it snow crunch, stepping in the snow. Snow crunch, delight in what is underfoot. What kind of contentment is that? What kind of practice is that? Please consider well as you go from the retreat back to our so-called daily life. There are practical points that need to be taken up, and we have touched on them, especially the people giving the brief Dharma talks have been really helpful. The importance of the physical posture and of dealing healthfully with the pain, to rise from the zazen. Tim mentioned this today. When the bell goes off, you don't stop the zazen, it continues, but maybe not in the seated posture because you have to go to the bathroom, but the practice goes to the bathroom and comes back and now sits again. This is very important. The focus to sustain it, as David C. spoke about the other day. The samadhi, this concentrated oneness, deepening, and then what is called dhyana, an even deeper state where, in a sense, at least for the time being, the self is undone. We can also speak about it as we have in terms of doubt and contentment and doubt. Refining and refining, deepening and deepening until, if we call it a mind, the mind is a shining jewel. And finally, what do you do with it? What do you do with it? This is a good koan for us now at the end of this retreat. When the mind has become a shining jewel, what do you do with it? I'd like to end by speaking briefly about some recent experiences. I've been asked to talk about my own experience, which I prefer not to, but I will, having been asked. Over 40 years ago now, I had the great good fortune to come to Japan to practice and to meet, even to work with many of the leading Zen masters of the time, Yamada Mumon and so on. Marty, you were there at the time. We remember well, huh? One of the first, within a few days of being in Kyoto, you and Yoshiko-san took me to Reunion to hear Yamada Mumon give a monthly talk. You remember? It was very impressive to meet these Zen masters and even maybe be able to ask them a question, or if fortunate enough to live with them in that temple or the monastery. Well, I mention this because last month I had a chance to do something similar. To put it in context, there was a British guy in his 50s who had come here to Japan, and he wanted to be ordained as a priest. As you can imagine, he had difficulty. He couldn't speak Japanese. He didn't know much about the practice, but he just wanted to be ordained as a priest. Well, he didn't have much success, and finally he was sent to me. And so we would sit together in the mornings at the Hermitage, and he would try to tell me how much he wanted to be ordained, as if this was going to solve all his problems. And I, as many of you know, I can be very tough. And I tried to challenge him on that. What is it that you're really trying to do by being ordained? What is that going to get you? What is it that really drives you? Anyway, the next day, it was January 10th. There's an annual meeting of the monks of all the Rinzai monasteries, about 36 of them now. They come together at Myoshinji, the largest of the monasteries. And they, one or two of the senior monks come and they discuss things. Well, when that was over, I was asked to come and join an American monk who has now trained, I believe, 17 years in the monastery, a good friend of mine. And he is now, as the active Rinzai monks in the monastery, I believe the longest serving monk in America. The times they are changing. Anyway, we went to meet the master of Myoshinji, the Zen master training the monks there. and we had a wonderful time speaking for a couple of hours. But something that this American monk said really shocked me because I had completely forgotten about it. He was telling the Myo Shinji Zen master that 17, 18 years ago when he came to Japan, he and I had met. And I was, of course, living as a layman, but going regularly to the monastery and practicing. I was trying to do what Tim has been talking about, make this a real seamless practice. And this American monk thought, I'm going to do the same thing. If I can get into a monastery, but train as a layman, not be ordained, not become a monk, it doesn't seem to be necessary. I'm going to do it the way you do it. So, and again, I forgot about this, but as he was telling me about it, I said, oh, he's going to make it my fault here. But he said, I went to your office at the university. I was teaching at this Rinzai Zen University. And he said, I've decided I want to do it the way you do it as a layman. And do you remember what you said, Jeff? No. You told me, no, you should train for at least 3 months or a year in a monastery. And boy, I was really pissed, Jeff, because I had made these plans and it seemed like such a good one. And then you just flipped it around. But anyway, I took your advice and I entered the monastery. And for the next couple of years, Jeff, again, he's saying this in front of the Myo Shinji Zen master. For the next couple of years, Jeff, every couple of days, I got to the point where I thought, what the hell am I doing here? I've got to get out of here. But now it's been 17 years and I'm still here in the monastery. Well, as you can imagine, after that, I went back and the next morning, the British guy was again at the Hermitage. And he actually happened to say just to that morning in one-on-one, it seems like you don't want me to be ordained. Is that right? I said, well, not exactly. It's a little simpler than that. And then I told him what I just told you about the experience yesterday, where I had told this guy who wanted to be a layman that he should train for at least a while as a monk. So sometimes it can be hard to follow this Zen rationale, this Zen logic, but there is a rationale to the madness sometimes. Sometimes it takes a while to see, but this British guy is now in Thailand trying to be ordained. May he have success. But I trust you see how all of this has to do with precisely what we are doing now. What is it that really drives us to do what we are doing? Whether it's being ordained or practicing as a layman, that's not the real issue, is it? Of course, if you can be ordained, it can be a wonderful, precious step on the way. By all means, do it. But again, what is it that is really driving you to do that? If this is not clear, you can imagine the problems that will occur. When I was leaving the monastery at Myo Shinji last month, the Zen master, as is his habit, they write calligraphy, and they will often give the guests a sample of their calligraphy with a saying, an expression for the new year. This was January 10th. So, and this is the one that Zen master did. Can you see it okay? Let's see here. Yeah, it's the year of the rabbit. But what this says is, Fudan no doryoku, tensai ni masaru. Fudan, unending, no gap. No doryoku. Doryoku is like effort or practice. So constant practice. Tensai is like a genius, a natural ability or a genius. Tensai ni masaru. Constant practice surpasses genius or natural ability. And then he has a little note here saying this was a favorite saying of my Zen master because he's 43 years old, pretty young for a Zen master. So at that age, they often will basically repeat what their teacher has said out of respect, very Japanese. But it really struck me last month when I met this guy, because over 40 years ago when I came, meeting these Zen masters, so awesome. And now when I met this guy, a very fine Zen master, I can wholeheartedly encourage you to practice with him if you can. Of course, he doesn't speak English. But he was 43 years old, 25 years younger than me. And he was a student at Hanazono University, my university, almost 20 years ago. So a little bit different, and yet really not so different. But this kind of an expression can be very helpful for me. So again, I'm not speaking out of false modesty or humility. I mean it. I have no special ability or talent. Stubborn, maybe, but I have no special ability or talent. But I did continue on no matter what. And in a sense, that's what we all have to do. Again, not as some kind of a willful, forced effort, but as something coming from the ground itself. It must go. And in that sense, here, this expression, our constant practice surpasses any kind of natural genius or natural ability and talent. Consider that well as you return in this year of the rabbit, this calligraphy of Shimada Daisetsu is his name. Again, he's the new Roshi or Zen master training the monks at Myoshinji. Shimada Daisetsu, the same Daisetsu as Suzuki Daisetsu, actually. And the American monk sent this as his New Year's card. Again, you see the rabbit in his hands, the monk out begging. Another talent I don't have, drawing or painting. But I trust you can see how all of this is intimately connected with our present practice. If you find this is the way you must go, go. And you see you have a sangha of like-minded practitioners around the world here with you. If you find Zen is not the only way, but if you find this is the way you must go, let us walk that way together. If you ever feel the need to contact me, I think you all have my email. Something decisive comes up, I'm here for you. But so, I believe, is everyone else. We still have plenty of time, so I'd like to open it up now. If you have a question for any of the other Dharma speakers or anyone, again, a question from out of the practice, including returning to the world, please feel free. Thank you. Jim.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And just to also thank Tina and Tim and Bruce and Lewis in terms of their transition talks. I got a lot out of that. That's very good. I might also suggest that in transition, we are always transitioning from one moment to the other. And we sometimes carry too many things into that next moment. I do that a lot. But as Ajahn Samato has said, and I think he's still back, I think he's back in London now, says, just like this, just be aware of what it is, just like this. And another example of that is when the boy was chased by the tiger and is hanging over the cliff with a tiger above him and a tiger below, he sees a ripe strawberry and he plucks it, and oh, how good it tasted. Just be aware of now. Thank you.
Anna Lara?
Thank you. I would like to express my gratitude for everybody to support our practice in one heart. Thank you very much. And I know that the retreat doesn't finish. It's life is itself. It's continuous in our life, in the life itself. That's all. And thank you.
Kumura-san, was my Japanese translation okay? If there are no other questions or concerns, I hand it back to the Jiki. Tim, thank you all for your participation. Again, we are doing this together. Let us continue right up to the end. And thank you so much to the Jikis and to Milan for organizing this.